On this edition of Independent Sources, separate and not equal, growing concerns that New York City's gifted and talented programs may lead to segregation in public schools.
Getting the word out. With only a small portion of the city's advertising dollars spent on ethnic media, certain communities may be missing out on important messages.
And the doctor is in. A pioneering immigrant artist gives life to New York City's video art scene.
Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Abby Ashola.
And I'm Vianora Vinca. New York City's gifted and talented programs in public schools are coming under fire from some critics who say that they are reinforcing racial segregation in the city's classrooms. They contend that affluent Asian and white pupils have more access to these programs than less fortunate Black and Hispanic students.
Department of Education officials have denied that and defended the programs. They say that the DOE's overall objective is to improve the quality of education in public schools and reduce the achievement gaps among students. I
sat down with Dr. James Borland, a professor of education at Columbia University's Teachers College, and Michael Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, a Washington-based organization that advocates for improved childhood education. We spoke about the debate over the gifted and talented. Michael, you are a strong supporter of the Gifted and Talented program. What was the rationale behind its creation?
Well, we have a challenge in our country, which is that when students come into our classrooms, especially in the early ages, they tend to come in with vastly different preparation levels. So some kids are coming in ready to read at a second or third or fourth grade level. Other kids are way, way, way behind. A lot of this has to do with social class. Kids growing up in poverty tend to come in way behind with much smaller vocabularies. Kids who come from more affluent families tend to, in general, come in way, way, way far ahead. You can't bring all those students into the same classroom, and you've got a challenge. You've got to figure out how do you make sure that you challenge all the students and help kids get to where they need to be. Gifted and talented programs have traditionally been one answer to that question, which is to say, can we have some special programming for the students who are ready to accelerate ahead? That's certainly the way that it's been designed in many big cities, like in New York. You then see these programs continue in some cases through the elementary grades until middle school and high school, where you start talking about more advanced classes for those sorts of students. The big question, of course, is how do we make sure that those programs are as equitable as possible to make sure that everybody has a chance at getting into them and that they are not set in stone, so that once you're out of the program, you can never get back in.
Let me get to Dr. Borland. You are of the opinion that these programs promote segregation. Explain why.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, and I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I think it's clear that children differ in their needs, and we need to accommodate those differences, need to respond to them. My concern is with the way that it's done in some settings, such as New York City. We have real equity issues in New York City. About a third of the students in grades kindergarten through 5 are Caucasian or Asian American, yet these children occupy 3/4 of the slots in our gifted and talented programs. African American and Latino children make up about 2/3 of the population, but about 1/4 of the kids in gifted and talented programs. So we have real issues with regard to equity. It's not so much the concept of gifted education. That's my field. I've been an advocate for these kids for years, but it's the way that sometimes the programs are implemented and the consequences, such as what we're seeing in New York City.
Michael, what about this idea that that was actually forwarded by the mainstream press, that these programs reinforce segregation in public schools? What do you have to say to that?
Right. Well, look, there's an issue for sure in that, and the doctor is right that we see these big differences in race, but really what we're seeing more than anything are differences in class. In other words, African American and Latino students in New York City, as in many big cities, are much more likely to be poor than the white and Asian students. And it's the poor students who tend to come in so far behind, especially when it comes to their vocabulary development. Now, there's a lot of efforts to try to fix that, to try to incorporate preschool education, to try to help catch those kids up so that they can compete for these kinds of slots. but there are huge disadvantages that they come in with. And I think that's what you're really seeing. It's not so much by race, it's really by class. You imagine all the advantages that affluent kids come with. From better prenatal care to better nutrition to all of the words that they're hearing in their own homes, in their own families, if they're growing up with professional families, certainly families who are speaking English at home. All of that translates into these huge advantages. And when they come in and they take a test or they get assessed for gifted education, on average, they're going to tend to do better. And that's what you're seeing in New York. I don't know that there's a real solution to that other than to keep working hard at helping the disadvantaged kids catch up as fast as possible.
Dr. Borland, talking about the preparation that goes into being accepted in the Gifted and Talented program, you're talking here not only about the stress to parents and to the child itself. We're talking about 4-year-olds having to undergo these tough tests. You're talking about lots of money that have to be paid for books, preparation books. I read about boot camps, websites that parents can subscribe to for $40 or so a month. Explain what's going on.
Well, the city just switched tests and introduced a nonverbal test, the Naglieri nonverbal aptitude test. If you do a Google search for the Naglieri test, the first 3 things that come up are commercial sites for test preparation materials for parents. Another one of the advantages that affluent parents have is that they know what how the system works. They know it's test-based. Kids are admitted to the New York City Gifted and Talented programs solely on the basis of 2 tests taken when children are 4 or 5 years old for the most part. The test preparation, there's a thriving test preparation industry that's grown up around this and other forms of admission in New York City, such as admission to private schools. And this is another one of the advantages that affluent parents have. And while it's true that it's a matter of socioeconomic status as much as anything, socioeconomic status and racial and ethnic status in our society are highly correlated. So the outcome is that we find that Caucasian and Asian American kids predominate in these programs. And I'm not convinced that giftedness is less likely to be found among Latino and African American children. Either that's the case or the city's doing something wrong, and I think it's the latter.
You mentioned that they changed the test and it's less based on verbal abilities. Would that be likely to increase the number of children of color in these classes?
I doubt it. We have decades of research that show that nonverbal tests actually tend to disadvantage poor children and children of color. It seems counterintuitive, but in fact that's what the data show.
Michael, your take on that?
I think if you're talking about 4 or 5-year-olds, no matter what kind of test you use, you're going to have this situation where the kids coming from poverty are going to be at a disadvantage. So one thing New York City might consider is to delay its gifted programs until the kids are older, to maybe 3rd or 4th grade, or to make sure there are processes in place to make sure that the older kids have a chance to demonstrate their giftedness, so that by the time that the kids coming from poverty, or and other kids, can demonstrate their giftedness maybe more so when they're a little bit older, they can do so and they can get into these programs.
Dr. Borland, what about this idea that Michael is suggesting?
Well, it's certainly something to consider. The younger the children are, the more that relative advantages or disadvantages in family situations are going to loom large in the identification process. So that using a test-driven process with children as young as 4 and 5 is guaranteed to lead to the inequities that we're seeing persist in New York City Gifted and Talented programs today. Other things we can do would include using other forms of identification. We seem so enamored of tests and wedded to objective measures, but there's nothing sacrosanct, nothing wonderful about objective forms of assessment. There are other ways that we can identify kids that would open up the process.
Michael, when we talk about the place of the United States in the global education rankings, the United States has fallen to average according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Would you like to see the Gifted and Talented programs continue, and do you see these programs as a plus to the public school education in the United States?
Oh, they're definitely a plus. I mean, what we need to be doing in our education system is making sure every child gets challenged to fulfill their full potential and gets pushed as much as possible to learn as much as they can. Without a lot of these programs, what you'd have are a lot of kids sitting in class bored and not learning much. So these are absolutely essential programs. And you're right that we are not doing very well compared to many of our international competitors. And it's not just in averages. Even when you look at the top of the spectrum, you look at our highest performing students compared to the highest performing students in other countries, even our top students aren't doing all that great compared to our competitors, especially the competitors in East Asia and some of the Scandinavian countries. So, if we want to compete on a global stage, this is essential for us to do at the same time that we're helping all kids, even those that are far behind, catch up and learn as much as they can too. We've got to learn how to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Dr. James Borland, Michael Petrilli, thank you both for being in studio with us today.
My pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Still to come on the show, publishers of ethnic media vindicated by a new report.
Before that, Zyphus LeBron has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic and community media. From El Diario La Prensa, politicians are demanding that the Department of Transportation make neighborhood streets safer for pedestrians and school children. This after 6-year-old Amar Diarra Sabusa was crushed by a truck 7 blocks away from his school in Harlem. Manhattan Borough President Scott Stringer and other politicians recently gathered at the boys' school, PS 155, to highlight steps that the DOT should take to address the issue. According to Stringer, 3 other children have been fatally run over within 7 blocks surrounding that school since 2009. Public advocate Bill de Blasio has slammed Mayor Michael Bloomberg for what he says is the city's unfair treatment of small businesses in the outer boroughs. De Blasio recently released a report titled Borough Bias, How the Bloomberg Administration Drains. The document highlights the disproportionate amount of inspections conducted on businesses in the outer boroughs compared to the ones in Manhattan. As a result, many have paid more fines than their Manhattan counterparts. According to the report, businesses in Manhattan have paid 18% less in fines than the citywide average. That from the Queen's Chronicle. From Immigration Nation, many immigrants and their advocates are having mixed feelings about the sequestration's spending cuts. On the one hand, some immigrants and activists were pleased when thousands of detainees were released from immigration facilities in February to save government money. But many now worry about increased delays at ports of entry, including airports and border crossings. They also fear longer waits for visas and immigration cases. The State Department processes tourist and work visas and has already seen $850 million in cuts. This would likely cause a longer wait time for cases that have already been backlogged. Mayoral candidate Bill Thompson has expressed concern about the city not advertising enough in ethnic publications. The Center for Community and Ethnic Media released a report earlier this month revealing that 82% of the city's $18 million advertising budget goes to mainstream papers such as the Daily News and the New York Post. Thompson, who is Caribbean American, wrote an opinion column for Voices of New York, criticizing the current administration for overlooking the ethnic media and depriving communities of important information and access to their government. We'll have more on that story in the second half of the show. And finally, a youth arts collective based in the Bronx has been forced to shut down after their members were evicted. The Rebel Diaz, an arts collective devoted to hip-hop culture, used to offer activities like open mic competitions and community service for the past 4 years. The group was recently planning to open a hip-hop library to celebrate the culture. But members of the group say police arrived to their space on February 28th and barbarically threw out their paintings, musical instruments, and recording equipment. Rodrigo Venegas, one of the group's leaders, says they were thrown out because they refused to pay their landlord a $1,000 rental increase. Those were just some stories making headlines from the ethnic and community media. Back to Abby and Vianora.
Thanks, Zyphus. Publishers at ethnic media outlets have always complained that the city does not advertise in their pages. Now, a recent report from the Center for Community and Ethnic Media is lending support to these claims.
As we mentioned earlier in our News of the Week story, ethnic papers receive less than 20% of the city's multi-million-dollar ad revenue. That's left some to ask whether various city departments are actually reaching immigrant communities and fulfilling their legal obligation to provide information in all languages.
I spoke with Sarah Bartlett, the director of the Urban Reporting Program at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, and David Greaves, co-founder of the African-American publication Our Time Press, about the report's findings. Before we begin, full disclosure, Independent Sources co-host Gary Pierre-Pierre is also the director of the Center for Community and Ethnic Media, the group that compiled this report. So Sarah, I'll start with you. Why did your organization decide to do this report on how the city overlooks ethnic media when it comes to advertising?
Well, we'd heard reports from publishers for a number of years complaining that they felt very left out, and they'd showed us how there were ads running in some of the large mainstream publications, and they just couldn't understand why they didn't get a piece of that. And we started asking questions, and we realized we were pretty curious too. So we decided to really research it and look into it.
Okay, I just want to read this. Of the $18 million the city spends on advertising, 82% goes to major publications. That's what you found in your report. So which ethnic media outlets are the other 18%?
Hispanic publications like El Diario La Prensa. They do give to some community publications like the Amsterdam News if they're trying to reach the African American community. The World Journal and Tsingtao get a little bit. There's not a lot others. I mean, it's really very, very limited.
Yeah. And David, do you think that the ethnic media needs to do more to be more visible to the city to actually get advertising dollars from them?
Well, we do outreach to city agencies and try to get these dollars, but they don't. They call us with their press releases. We get press releases from them that they want to place in the paper for free, but the advertising we don't get, certainly not the level that we should be getting.
Okay, and the city puts out ads like public service messages and job postings and those kinds of things? Things
that would be very interesting to people in Bedford-Stuyvesant, certainly. You know, AIDS awareness, tax things, recruitment things, the lien notices. All of these things would be very interesting to our readership, but we just don't get the advertising dollars that would help us to get that message out.
Okay, obviously your readership would benefit from it. How does the city benefit from targeting them?
Well, first of all, it's a very important part of the city demographic, and if you're putting out health messages, certainly, you want to get them to the, if you will, the grassroots folks who really need it. And in our circulation in central Brooklyn would give them that. A lot of our readers don't read the New York Times, you know, don't read the Daily News and have an aversion to the New York Post. So they would benefit, the city would benefit by being more inclusive in their advertising.
Okay, and Sarah, in the report, you found that there are two agencies, advertising agencies, that handle the city's ads. How does that work?
The city, in order to get the best rates and to sort of be very efficient, has a contract that they want to use just two independent advertising firms. So they place all of their ads through those two firms. One's called Miller and the other's called Creative. And they've had the contracts for many, many years. In one case, 14 years, I think, in the other 25 years, which is an extraordinarily long time for a vendor to have a contract with the city. It spans multiple administrations, and
is that
you know,
fair?
I don't know if it's fair. It's unusual, and most recently we had heard that they really wanted to have more competition for that contract so that they could get some fresh thinking and really try to make sure that they were up to date with their approach. And instead, the same two people have gotten it, the same two firms have gotten it, and they lengthened the terms of the contract to 5 years, up from 2. So it's very puzzling, and I mean, it could be totally fine, but we don't know. There hasn't been enough real research into that, and I hope the Controller's Office looks into that.
So, David, how would ethnic publications like your own benefit from the ad dollars from the city?
Well, we'd be able to, we pay our writers, and we'd be able to, one, pay them more, and two, have them do more articles, so that when there are events, community events going on, when there's community happenings, and we'd be able to cover it better. Without those dollars, you can't ask people to work for free. It just doesn't work that way.
Are people ever at risk of closing down because they don't have enough ad dollars?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Every week is a drama when you don't have enough ad dollars, because the printer has to be paid, you know, the distributors have to be paid, and it'd be nice to be able to pay your own rent and things of that nature. And without the advertising dollars, there's always the juggling, and so it makes it harder when you don't have, obviously, the advertising dollars to make it work.
Okay. And Sarah, what's been the response to the report so far?
Well, so far we've had several politicians issue statements. Bill Thompson, who's running for mayor, the former controller, wrote a very strong op-ed article which ran in Queens Latino and I think some other publications, basically saying this is wrong, this is not the way to run a railroad. If we want to reach an important segment of our community, we need to change these policies. And of course, since he's running for mayor, he said, you know, and if I'm mayor, I'll make those changes. You know, that remains to be seen. The controller, John Liu, issued a statement also running for mayor, saying that the policy is wrong-headed and needs to be changed. He didn't offer any specifics, and we were hoping he would say something about the contracts, but not yet. Maybe at some point in the future. Do
you think they would change their tune after the elections?
You know, that's just pure speculation, and I try to stay out of that business.
Okay. Is the city somehow skirting the law by not advertising in ethnic media and reaching out to people with foreign languages?
Well, there are language access laws and executive orders on the books. The Bloomberg administration's actually been one of the national leaders in that, and I think we've had some conversations with the Office of Immigrant Affairs run by Commissioner Fatima Sharma, who has been really a leader and an advocate for this. And when we brought it up, we said, you know, why is this not being applied to advertising? It was obvious to us that they had never really thought about that. That was kind of a novel way of looking at it. And as soon as we brought it up, she was like, you know, you're totally right. This needs to be part of our language access policy. So I think her office is going to try to make sure that the annual implementation plans that each agency has to file will now start to take advertising into effect. So I think she's going to make some changes through her office. Whether it's against the law, I leave that to the lawyers. I think there are clearly responsibilities, especially if you're getting federal dollars, to make sure that you broadcast these messages, especially for recruiting, in a widespread manner. So again, it's early days. We have to wait and see what other people say who have a legal background.
So what's next?
Well, you know, this is an election year, and I think that if there's any hope of getting some real commitments to change, this is the time. And then starting in January, you know, it's a blank piece of paper. So whoever gets into City Hall has an opportunity. If you talk to the city, the advertising firms, Miller and Creative, they'll tell you there's nothing they can do about it. They're just doing what they're told by the city agencies. And if you ask the city agencies, they say, well, we're just doing what Miller and Creative. So it's kind of like this. And I think in order to really get some change, you have to have change within the administration saying this is not acceptable, give us a different recipe. And we'll see what happens with the controller's office with the contracts.
Okay. And David, what do you hope to see?
Well, I would like to see the media sort of put the candidates on the spot on this on this issue, because they are coming around to us. They're going to our editorial boards. They're courting us, if you will. And I would like to see the ethnic media. I know we certainly will, and just encourage them to push the candidates on this issue, because it is one of fairness, and I think it's one that people will recognize as being fair.
Okay, David Greaves, Sarah Bartlett, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
When we come back, a pioneering immigrant producer on public TV helps legitimize a fledgling art form.
And finally from us, today it's common to see video art exhibited in museums and galleries, but that wasn't always the case. In the 60s, video wasn't even considered art. Jaime Davidovich was an early pioneer of that art form, and he's never stopped experimenting and creating new works, not even after he became one of the first public access television producers in New York.
The Live Show with Dr. Videovich, critiqued television and gave the alternative art scene a presence on cable television. We hear more about Davidovich in this report from Judith Escalona.
Now, do you find critics more receptive to your work than now you are the best artist?
No, that's actually the why I say that I'm the best artist, because the critics will not touch me with a 10-foot pole.
Jaime Davidovich defies definition. He is a video artist who paints and a television producer more interested in art than in ratings. Davidovich is a pioneer of public access cable television. He created an art show for TV unlike any other.
And was conceived with the idea of the cabaret Voltaire. They will show work that they will confront the audience, that they will question the audience, and sometimes they were very hostile to the audience.
The live show debuted on public access in 1979, hosted by Dr. Videovich, Jaime Davidovich's TV persona.
TV addiction.
I watch too much TV. What can I do for this?
But what can you do? I think that you have a problem of saturation.
It was the first show to feature the work of downtown artists in a format that was a cross between video art and the Ed Sullivan Show.
I don't know what you're doing.
Well, we're doing art.
Davidovich arrived in New York 16 years earlier when the alternative art scene was exploding on 2nd Avenue and south of Houston Street, the area now called Soho. Downtown artists were experimenting with new forms and challenging the status quo. Davidovich fit right in.
I believe that art has to have a political component, otherwise it's just decoration. In 1963, I decided to move to United States because the situation in Argentina was very stifled.
Downtown artists were also seeking alternatives to the galleries and museums. They wanted to deinstitutionalize art, making it accessible to a broader public. They took to the streets, displaying work on billboards, walls, and storefronts.
This is also similar conceptually in all the things that now the people are talking in Occupy Wall Street and Occupy the art world, because the 1% that controls the museums, the 1% that controls the art galleries, and the 1% controls what's being seen in television and what's not being seen.
In 1973, Davidovich was invited to participate in the prestigious Whitney Biennial, a survey of American contemporary art held every 2 years by the Whitney Museum.
After the Whitney, I stopped doing the tape projects and concentrated more on video. And I became part of the video scene in New York City. Video fit perfectly into this kind of art outside the mainstream, because video, when we first invented, was never shown in art galleries or institutions, or was not even considered art.
The live show ended in 1984 after a 5-year run. Today, you can watch segments of it on YouTube.
YouTube is like public access and steroids.
Nearly 40 years and several accolades later, Jaime Davidovich is still a working video artist, recently exhibiting in Spain, Argentina, England, and the U.S. A New York solo show is scheduled for later this year. I'm Judith Escalona, Independent Sources.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Till next time, be independent-minded.